Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this late October evening. It's wonderful to see you here. And so really, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alastair Martin. Alastair, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll let you get into your presentation about your experience of the community mooring.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to talk and assume you can all hear.
We can, yeah.
Great. So I'm Alastair Martin. I'm an on and off boater. I'll be on the boat during the next few weeks, and I've been on the boat since 2010. And I'm involved in a charity called Community Moorings Scotland, which, if it's all right, I'll just tear right into now.
Great, and I'm going to go off screen and I'll see you at the end of your presentation.
Great. Okay, so this is Community Moorings Scotland. And our vision is to create amazing places on vibrant canals. And specifically, we're working on the Lowland canals of Scotland. Well, we can extend further, but we're concentrating on the Lowlands of Scotland for now. So about those canals, let's just see, there we are. It's a small network. This is the view from the top of the Falkirk Wheel, which I'm sure you'll have seen. Many of you will have done it. Some of you will have seen this view. Others will have seen the view from the bottom. It's quite amazing driving a boat onto empty space. And when you do this, it's really quite a sight. It's a small network. There's one conventional canal. It's a transit canal, nice and deep, lots of locks. It joins the Clyde in the west to the Forth in the east, and there's a much shallower contour canal heading into Edinburgh from there. And where the canals join, you find the Falkirk Wheel. And the Falkirk Wheel was part of the Millennium Link project, which reinstated several parts of the canal from west of Glasgow all the way into central Edinburgh at a cost of £78 million. And a lot of the credit for that can go to the late Ronnie Rusak MBE in the middle here, who many years ago bought a pub. And he looked out the window and saw some water, and he said, "What river is that?" It turns out it was the Union Canal. And after years of campaigning by Ronnie and others, the canals were brought back to life. And that's the Linlithgow Union Canal Society on the left and the Seagull Trust on the right, both active organizations with plenty of volunteers on the canals. And the bottom, you see the flotilla of lights now named in Ronnie's honor. We have on this rather small network a good history of volunteering and community engagement. So what's the problem? Why do we need Community Moorings Scotland? Now, the swear jar, right. On Scotland's canals, we have one mooring provider. So perhaps 7 or 8 years ago, frustration with Scottish canals reached its zenith, to the extent that Community Moorings Scotland made almost all of its initial income from our special Scottish Canals swear jar. If anyone said anything rude about Scottish canals, they put money in the jar. This jar is still open, by the way, and I'm going to do my best to keep my bill for this evening down. Anyway, boaters need critical mass. Canals need activity, and currently our canals are about a little bit below 50% capacity. And in response to that, 2 organizations were set up at the same time. The Lowland Canals Association was set up to represent boaters to Scottish canals and to seek improvements in the way the canals were run. And Community Moorings Scotland was launched to create an alternative to Scottish canals. So that was the origin. And now we're established. Community Moorings Scotland is a Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation, or SCIO. It's one pot cooking. It's a charity that can trade. It's regulated like a charity, but structured like a business. So instead of shareholders and directors, we have members and trustees. And the trustees ensure the charity delivers its purposes and the answer to the members for doing so. The purposes are encapsulated in our constitution, and they are the most important part of that constitution. So to summarize our vision and our purposes, we're here to make the canals vibrant and active for everyone with an interest in them. And we're doing that, or we're going to do that, by establishing a network of non-profit mooring hubs. In many respects, these hubs will operate like commercial moorings. That's an advantage of the SCIO structure, but they do more than that. One aspect is giving flexibility, letting boaters be boaters and making it easy for them to move around, something that's not straightforward in Scotland just now. But the two larger differences are in co-location and engagement, which I'll cover in the next couple of slides. So here's our first site. If everything goes well, we're just about to sign our lease with Scottish Canals for a 2 or 3 metre width of banking, abutting what was just a muddy field a few years ago, and that's on the top of that picture there. Now that site hosts a market garden, a community farming charity called Farmily, an electric florist. So you order online, they turn up in an electric van. This is where they gather their collections of plants together. There's a microbeer brewery in construction there. There's a workshop. And today there are hundreds of pumpkins. So that's Narrowboat Farm. It's not Community Moorings Scotland, but it is our neighbour and our neighbouring landowner and the source of many of the services that we need to run moorings. So we believe that in each location, there will be some kind of community interest venture that will go well with the location and with Community Moorings Scotland. It'll be different everywhere. And I can't say too much about the locations we're eyeing up just now, but we think that similar but different ideas are going to pop up everywhere that we operate to mutual benefit. So to engagement. Here's the first set of events that we did. There on the top left, you see our local boat mechanic, Pierre. He's showing boaters how an engine works. And it's handy that he's doing that on a farm because tractor engines are far more easy to see than boat engines. And that's on the bottom left, that's our chair, Chrissy, who is teaching the noble art of splicing. And on the top right, you can see a long map of the Forth and Clyde and the Union Canals, which we printed out and we invited people to scribble on. And that is part of how we found out what people want from community moorings, where they want moorings, where they think moorings would be suitable for future sites. Bottom left, that's actually the Seagull Trust, who have a lot of boats operating and coming into that meeting. So while we've been setting up, Narrowboat Farm has grown from strength to strength. So there's some organic vegetables heading into Linlithgow on the Little Spark. And that's the Farmily gang in sort of middle bottom working away. And as a bonus, the Jennifer Ewan band. And boaters have moored at Narrowboat Farm in various numbers. But we're still not offering moorings. We're still passing up trading revenue for a charity that we're trying to establish. What on earth have we been doing? Why are we still not live? Have we frittered away the time? So here's where I have to bring in another CMS. And that is CMS Cameron McKenna Nabarro Olswang LLP. We've been negotiating with Scottish Canals on our own, essentially as amateur lawyers. It got us as far as getting heads of terms, but then we got stuck. Our heads of terms were turned into draft lease and trading agreements, which we simply couldn't sign. We were stuck. If we'd signed that, then we would have been simply a minor subsidiary of Scottish Canals. That's not what our members tasked us with doing. But in order to get progress, we needed proper lawyers. And that's where CMS Cameron McKenna came in. And I have to give them huge credit for coming in and helping us there. There is no way that it would have been affordable for us to get to the stage that we're at now without their help. We're ready to go. We're ready to launch. And so this is it for us. We have in place, ready to sign, a lease and a trading agreement with the Scottish Canal, a deed of servitude for the basic access that we need at Narrowboat Farm. Insurance quotes are in, our budget and cash flow forecasting are in. We have initial launch cash in hand, largely from donations and us and one grant. Our mooring agreements are nearly complete, and our agreements with Narrowboat Farm and so forth are works in progress. We have more pro bono support coming in to help us with accountancy and with our planning position, which we're starting off on in the very basic form that we need to launch operations. So here's how we're going to launch. Next month, we hope to open a ballot for moorings. We will offer 9 moorings. We expect, it depends on the length of boats that want to moor, but we expect to offer 9 moorings at the first site. We're keeping 1 back for visitor moorings, and this is part of our agreement with the Scottish Canals that we will do that at the sites that we open. We will publish alongside that the rules for the ballot, the categories of moorings that we'll be able to offer, and people will be able to peruse the terms and conditions that they'll be signing up to if they become a customer of Community Moorings Scotland. In January, the ballot will be drawn. We believe, an independent person to pull the ballot with witnesses from the membership and the board. And that allows us in March 22 to go live. So what have we learned in that process? This has been hard. It's been hard for three main reasons. First is that you get snarled up. We've had a few scuffles along the way, and each time you have a scuffle with your counterparty, you have a long delay. And secondly, the more delays you have, the more time passes, and the more things change. We're all older. We've had trustee churn, but we've had new blood in as well. And likewise, Scottish Canals is in fact under new management. And we're all of the view that the change in Scottish Canals has been hugely positive for what we're trying to do. And the third difficulty is the perennial. Not enough people and not all bases covered in terms of the skill set and the experience. We're all stretching ourselves and we're all learning fast as we do this. But it pays off. We've got to the point where we're actually naming dates. And I believe that the next time we speak, we will have ink on paper and boats on water. And that's where I'll finish.
Alastair, thank you very much. That was a whistle-stop tour through what I think has probably been a fairly challenging time. But even in the 10 minutes you've been speaking there, it's certainly given me well, half a page worth of questions. And I'm sure we'll be back with some questions a little bit later. And I'll probably take this opportunity to encourage our attendees and audience tonight to put some more questions. Thank you for the questions that are coming through. But Alastair, for now, thank you. And I'm going to invite Al to come on screen and share his experiences. And Al, feel free to turn your video on now and share your thoughts. Thanks very much.
I am here. Yeah, well, that was a great talk. There's a few things we've been doing differently ourselves, but I guess, first of all, yeah, I'm Al Cree. I am a co-founder and co-member of Surge Cooperative. And we started looking at moorings in about 2015. Maybe I'll start my slideshow and carry on from there. So hopefully you can see the first slide.
Great, yeah.
And great. So we decided to set up as a non-profit moorings cooperative, or effectively a housing co-op actually. And we just had to tweak some of the rules and the wording in a standard housing co-op format. Initially, we currently have 8 members, and we've been registered with the FCA Financial Conduct Authority for 2 years, nearly 3 years now. So we're focused on a tidal river where we're interested in having moorings and can see the possibilities here. One of the things you can see from the next slide, hopefully, is that whilst we were looking at the river where we were interested, we saw there was over 43 disused wharves. So this is in East London. It's Bow Creek, or the lower tidal Lee, and it also up to the top right there, you can see the Channelsea River and Abbey Creek and the Stratford back rivers that lead to the Olympic Stadium. But when we started researching and looking at the area, we realized the heritage loss that was happening in this area, and we could see all the new developments along this waterway, which is currently one of the last stretches of water in London with prime real estate property that can maximize value on water. So in doing that, we often find that no moorings created, and in fact some of these developments, even the mooring bollards that get ripped out, and you lose the heritage of the moorings possibilities. So you can see here up where we currently are, this is on the Channelsea River. This is looking at a historical photo. I think that's from the 1910 or 1890, and on the right it's a relatively recent up to date. But whilst looking at these photos, you can see the barges there, and there's no barges in the current one, with skyscrapers in the background now instead of coal chimneys. And with that here as well, you see barges and the river. So there has been a long history on East London's waterways of barges and freight, and in fact workers' co-ops. But now the waterways are quite sterile in this part of London, and in fact a lot of waterways across the UK, where people are finding it harder and harder to find moorings because there are no longer any factories abutting the water space, and land by a river is prime real estate. So again, here you can see this is Canning Town, where there used to be sailing barges, and that's my barge there, moored up on the Channelsea River. But by starting a co-op, we decided to go for a co-op, and one of the reasons for that was we were involved in a charity beforehand, and felt that we can get more from working cooperatively together than the structure that a charity provides. So obviously normally with a charity you have someone in charge that directs things, and the people that work with them have less of a say in the outcomes of how things work, and you have less of a community kind of cohesive spirit as well. So so by doing that, you can work together and do creative things. And one of the things was we looked at the heritage of the water space. And if anyone is not very keen on fast flashing images, I'll give you a warning now. I've got a quick flashing image of all the historical bollards of Bow Creek. So here's a little GIF. It's one of creative projects that we worked on as a co-op. This was sort of cataloguing the bollards of the river. And we've also been working with Thames 21 to do river cleanups as well. So you see here, this is how we managed to get volunteers to get in the mud, and everyone loves getting in the mud. And that's one of the great things of working at a community organisation, is that nobody minds getting mucky, and everyone's just as equal when they're covered in mud. So that allows us as well, being a co-op, we're not just interested in the sort of housing mooring side. It kind of has tended to draw people who are interested in the creative side of things and the environment. So we're very keen to improve the water space and work cooperatively together to do that. So we've worked on art projects, and we had some work that we did for Newham Heritage Month, where we created a film, and various members have done different things. We're able to pool all our skills together to create something that draws the different skill sets from each other. So that also goes hand in hand with how the structure of a co-op works, with secretary and your directors, or your different breakout committees that you may have. You can draw on different people's skills and still work cooperatively and collaboratively. And here is a case in point. So it's a floating habitat island that we launched in the river here, and we managed to improve the wildlife habitat space. So it's now a bit overgrown, and we are hoping there to create, or we have just got funding to create 3 more here. But this goes back to a long-term goal, which is to look at the whole of the river and try and see where we can find spaces on the river that we can work together to improve. And so far we have been working on the Longwall path, which is a part of the river nearby, and cleaning up the planters. This is Thames Waterland currently, and getting some cohesion together and getting people out that wouldn't normally go out and improve their local community space. So it's a great way of getting the community together and to help to improve water spaces, with the ultimate goal, obviously, of trying to bring boats back onto the river. So you can see here's some cleanups of the river as well. Where we are, there's been, I think it's 80 years of rubbish thrown in the river and no boats have been able to moor here. So we've taken over 4 tons of rubbish out, and it gives everyone a sense of ownership and custodianship of the water space. At the moment, it's an interesting case in point because the riverbeds is the Canal and Rivers Trusts are meant to have navigational jurisdiction, but they've sort of lost their ownership of the riverbed that it seems like they could have kept from old Acts of Parliament, and now the Port of London Authority can see a opportunity to claim they own the riverbed and complicate things for us. But it means that the riverbed's not being looked after, no one cares about it apart from when it can make money for someone. So we're hoping to try and actually work together with landowners and developers and suggest solutions to creating cooperative moorings on different parts of the river. And as I said earlier, there's over 43 wharves along this river. So working together, we can create a lot of potential moorings, and it would be great to do that rather than lose that opportunity with developments. Here is a proposal that we have for small moorings on the Channelsea, and this will be our first moorings sort of as a test case to prove that this works. We're not the first cooperative moorings organisation, but to do this here in this part of London, it would be a great test case to then try and roll it out further down the river in different appropriate locations. And some of these places could be for more commercial or freight. Different parts of the river here would dictate different types of mooring. So it wouldn't all be necessarily residential, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate, but it's possible and it should happen. We're losing our waterways heritage at a drastic rate, and there's a moorings crisis, not just a housing crisis, but a moorings crisis. I'm sure most people on this meeting will be aware of themselves. But the problem with that is trying to keep them affordable. And so that's one of the reasons why we felt a co-op would work well for us. And a way that we've figured out to make it work is if every member of the co-op is able to keep their vessel, and they would have it valued before becoming a member of the co-op and bring it to the co-op's mooring, and then it can only increase in value by inflation and plus small amounts. I can't remember what it is said in our rules, but I think it's 1.5–2% per year, and then any extra works that people have done on their boat. And that's one way to keep the moorings affordable, so people don't bring a boat to a mooring, then as soon as it's on the mooring, try and sell their boat for an inflated amount. We want to keep moorings available for people who need affordable moorings, otherwise the value can drastically increase. So that was that's our proposal for the site there. Here was one of our policy meetings that helped inform our work. So I guess a little bit to almost finish on is how we managed to get where we are. So we were lucky to get funding from, at the time it was the Power to Change Bright Ideas Fund, which is ultimately lottery funding, but it goes through groundworks. And they gave us, on the bottom left, Sean Whelans, who is a co-op advisor and was really great in helping us set up. And one thing we found is we've had so much help from other co-ops. In fact, I think I saw Charles McLaren is maybe on this call, who's a member of Hermitage Moorings. They're a co-op on the Thames, and they gave us a great help in the beginning, and we're happy to discuss how their membership rules worked, and that helped us inform our own. And there are now quite a few other people looking at cooperative moorings. I think Richard Howlett may also be on this call. He's helping some other moorings groups work together and set up cooperative moorings. And there are a few groups that I'm aware of all over the UK actually looking at setting up cooperative moorings. So it's definitely an interesting way to go. And it is hopefully a way that we can create moorings, but keep them affordable if possible as well, and have community cohesion and stewardship of the water spaces. So this is a little snippet, I'll kind of finish on this, of our membership rules to try and stop the moorings become a way for people to financialize their vessel. Maybe I'll skim over that, but there's a Channelsea, as we like to call him or her, on the river. But I guess, yeah, feel free to ask some questions at the end, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Al, thank you very much indeed. Again, really, really interesting topics, and you've certainly lit things up in the Q&A. There's plenty of questions coming through, but I would encourage everyone with us tonight, keep those questions coming. We're going to try and tackle as many of those as we possibly can before we wrap things up at 8:30. So Al, thank you. And without any further ado, I'm going to go straight to Paul. Paul, you're up and running now. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say in the next 10 minutes or so. Thanks. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul. So hello, everyone. I'm Paul Powlesland. I am from the River Roading Trust, and I live on the River Roading in East London now. It's interesting actually seeing the different presentations and quite how official both the presentations are and indeed the projects. It's been really impressive to see the amount of groundwork that's been put in for the other community moorings. And as you'll see, my project that I began is very different. So I've lived on a narrowboat for 10 years in London, and about 5 years ago, I both realised that the writing was on the wall for the kind of very free, very beautiful community that I joined in London, and that the future was increasing harassment from Canal and River Trust. Also that I increasingly noticed this disjunct between boaters who wanted to do something for the river they live on, for the canal they live on, and the top-down approach from Canal and River Trust, which often made that almost impossible. So there were the rivers and canals that were crying out for energetic people who care about them to come and look after them, but the system was set up in a way that those people couldn't actually have an impact on where they lived. And I wanted to try and see if it was possible to just do something differently. So I literally got a map out of the rivers of London and started having a look. And I think you should be seeing on my screen now the one that I came across. Yeah. And this is the River Roading in East London. Really struck out for me as the kind of key place that seemed the best place to do something. That was for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's the second biggest river in London. Sorry, the third biggest river in London after the Thames and the Lee, where the River Lee, where Surge Co-op is based. But unlike both those rivers, it didn't seem to have any navigation authority kind of looking after it or in charge of it. So the PLA is in charge of the first section, and the EA does flood defence on the upper river. But there was a section of the river, which I'm going to hopefully zoom in on now, just above Barking Town Centre. So you can see here's Barking Town Quay, where I'm putting my mouse, and above that there was a section of the river which had no navigation authority and no one had ever lived on it. And yet, because it was tidal, it was still accessible on higher tides, and big enough to get narrowboats up. So I started researching this river more, and came across a patch of land, again where my mouse is, which was unregistered, which seemed the perfect place to start on moorings. So whilst all of this plan was in place, or getting into place, I then received my dreaded Section 8 from Canal and River Trust. And although I had reasons that I could fight that Section 8. I actually decided in the end that I didn't want to, and that actually maybe this was a sign to go and try and do something different and see if it was possible to. There's a very good quote from Buckminster Fuller called saying something like, you can't change the existing system by fighting it. You've got to create a better version, effectively. So I decided to follow that quote and see if it was possible that if I was critiquing CRT for being too top down, too expensive, and not actually engaged, not connecting people who live on the river to that river in a positive way, maybe I could try and create that myself, as naive as that seemed. And so on the day that my Section 8 expired, I left Bow Creek, heading to the river Roding. My narrowboat was completely unseaworthy for the journey, and it was terrifying along the Thames. And I had no permissions, no organisational funding or anything. I just moved to the river Roding to see what would happen. So this is actually another one of our members arriving at the river. I think it's one of the highest flood barriers in the UK, and quite an entrance. Although it's rather brutalist, it's also a sign of being home. So I arrived up the river and headed on up. And actually the first few nights on the river were terrifying because it's tidal and there was no mooring facility set up. So I would at various tides get caught on the bank, had to sort of take my shoes and socks off to wade over to the side and climb up a wall using an old shopping trolley to get on and off my boat. It was definitely an adventure. But I soon settled on this site nearby, which was a large reed patch on the edge of Barking town centre, which I hope she would have seen this photo here. This was where I decided to set up the mooring and to begin the project. It's about a 15-minute walk from Barking town centre, but sort of hidden amongst these reeds and trees, with swans and kingfishers. Probably one of the most incongruous places I know in London for the sheer sort of the way that nature is so directly abutted to the North Circular nearby, this council estate, warehouses and cars and this very intense industrialized city, but also this very beautiful nature as well. And then I decided to set up the project. So the key thing for me was to show as soon as possible that the project was doing good, effectively, that it was putting something back into the river and revitalizing this river that had been rather sort of lost and forgotten. So I put out a call out on London Boaters Facebook group for people to join me in this project, and was very clear from the start that although we were technically at the time squatting on the river, that everyone would nonetheless have to pay for the moorings, £1,000 a year, and also commit to at least 12 hours a month work on the river in return for this mooring. It's interesting, really, because for the first couple of years, I didn't actually have any legal right to ask for that, because it was a squatted project. We now, as we'll find out later, official, but everyone went along with it, and everyone who came along wanted to get engaged with the river in that way. You know, it wasn't for the first couple of years. Well, it's not easy on the Roding now. You know, it's a semi-tidal river. It's a challenging place to live. But in the first couple of years, it wasn't easy at all. There's a lot of work involved. So everyone who came really wanted to come to be part of something special and restore this river. So that was the deal from the start. And we began very rapidly to try and to show that we were doing good on the river. So just see if I can get up this photo. So we began doing river cleanups. The foreshore of the Roding is one of the worst, most polluted rivers in the country because it suffers from rubbish coming downstream, rubbish coming upstream of the tide, rubbish going in Barking Creek. This patch of river here that you can see a photo of on the foreshore in Barking had about 50 pieces of rubbish per square metre. It was literally carpeted. And over the course of various river cleanups, we've taken tons and tons and tons of rubbish out of the river. You can see the result of one of the cleanups there that was taken out in the course of one day in one very small stretch of river. And by really going in and demonstrating that we were doing good for the river, that's what helped to eventually make the project more official. So instead of saying to the local council, well, we're hoping to do this positive thing in the future, we could say, we're already here doing this thing, do you support us? And when you look at a photo like this, when you see the results of what is happening on the ground, it's very hard for someone to turn around and say, no, we don't like you taking tons and tons of rubbish out the river in your spare time. Actually, no, you can't plant loads of trees and put in benches and walkways and informational signs and look after the river in your spare time. How dare you? You know, it's much harder to say. And that also works with the other permissions that we needed. So we are on a stretch of river that's owned by the Crown Estate, which is lucky, because if we'd been on the Port of London Authority part, we would probably never have got permission for this project. I'm sure many of you might be aware how difficult the PLA can be. But actually the Crown Estate were incredible. They were really supportive of the project, and they could see the vision of what we were trying to create on this river, and effectively turning what is an asset for them into something better. Before it was unused, unloved, and they could see we're on the ground actually making a difference to improve it. So they eventually granted us a lease, but in order to get that, we had to become a bit more official. So we set up the River Roading Trust in 2019, and the lease is between the Crown Estate and the River Roading Trust, and then from the River Roading Trust to all of the boaters involved in the project. And as part of those leases, everyone has to agree to do to pay the mooring fees, which funds the charity, and also to do the work on the river. That's a picture of our moorings there. We have 8 boats now, which is basically full on that stretch of moorings, though we might be opening up others. That's another view. So again, this is the view from the back of my boat, which is, to me, incredible. I'm, a 5-minute cycle from Barking town centre. You can just see the North Circular in the distance there, but you've also got this incredible, beautiful reed-fringed river full of trees and kingfishers. It's a magical place. And this is the communal area that we've created on the squatted land that we've taken over effectively. So we have a boardwalk here to raise us out of the tides, because this area is mud at low tide, but we are covered by a metre of water at high tide. We've got our seating area and dining area and our own sauna, which I think is the only sauna in Barking. And there's a picture of us, our little group. And this is us recently at a session to go and buy wood to build benches for the local area. So it's very much been an odyssey and quite tough. And actually, having listened to all the presentations tonight, I'm not necessarily sure which is the harder or easier way to go about it. Whether doing it unofficially or officially from the start is the easier one. But I have to say, I do think community moorings can do amazing things, both to give boaters places to live that are affordable, but also to do the restoration and protection work that our rivers particularly, but also our canals, so desperately need. And I just want to briefly chat about examples of those. So, this week it's very topical, the situation of sewage on the rivers. And we already have laws that ban sewage overflows into rivers, but a lot of the time they're just not enforced because there's nobody on the ground to enforce them. And at our rubbish collection weekend, which I showed you photos of earlier, we were collecting rubbish along one of the side creeks to the Roding, and I just came across a sewage overflow, spewing sewage into the river, and probably have been doing so for months, but nobody had noticed. But we were there on the ground, and because we are there, we see what's happening in the river. We can see the difference in the water. We're always walking around the area. We know what's happening on the ground. We were able to report that in and are now taking action against Thames Water to stop that happening. So not only do we notice it more, but we also are able to take that continued action that is needed to protect the river, because we want to, because we live there and we love this river and we want to care for her. And having that connection between boaters and the river they live on in such an in-depth way, I think, is possibly one of the most important things about community moorings. And I want to end with one photo, which is A, very topical, because it only occurred this weekend, and B, also very adjacent to the work done by the IWA. So one of the other things, amongst the other things we're doing, is to try and reopen navigation along the river. So the River Roding was navigable traditionally to Ilford Bridge, and there was a Barking and Ilford navigation company, but it all fell apart in the late 60s, early 70s. So no large vessel has ever made it from Barking to Ilford since, I think, at least 50 years. And we started investigating ways of opening that up. Now, normally to open up navigations, you might be talking millions of pounds, but in the can-do spirit of the River Roding Trust, we spent a couple of £100 building a floating raft, which we take up on the tide, so it's not even mechanical. And we basically use that to remove the rubbish and the obstacles that were blocking the river, and also to slowly chop back the encroaching willow that had been blocking the path, blocking the river. And also at the same time taking that willow and cutting it into bits and then using those bits to replant, because willow self-regenerates. So we were like trimming back the willow in some places and reforesting the Roding in others, and opening up navigation. And this is completely coincidental, but I'm very pleased to report that the first ever cruise from Barking up to Ilford happened this Sunday, and I managed to get my narrowboat all the way to just before Ilford Bridge. This is a photo of it heading upstream along the Roding, just before Ilford. So the towers in the distance there are Ilford. And I stopped just before Ilford Bridge because I want to have an official cruise next year with lots of invitees, hopefully some people from the IWA as well, to really celebrate this opening up navigation on London's third largest river for the first time in 50 years, as a result of a community mooring and a group of volunteers who love the river and want to look after it. Thanks.
Paul, thank you very much. If you get that cruise underway next year, I'll be there. If I'm in
I was going to have you on the invite list, Paul, don't worry. And I say you'll be the first, because we stopped 100 meters before the bridge, so I can now say the next year is the first one all the way to Ilford Bridge. Well, but luckily there's no more obstacles after that one. So there.
Great, I'd love to be there, and I'm going to invite the others to join, because we've got about 15 minutes left, and we have great questions already with us. It's been truly inspirational to listen to all three of you tonight. It really is a case of real activism, real passion, a little bit of I'm sensing you've got to be a bit intrepid as well, but also, Paul, in your presentation there, you're presenting yourselves also as frankly, canal restorers, first responders. It's a really interesting position that you've taken up. A bit unorthodox in the conventional thinking, but that's probably an accolade and a badge you'd like to wear. So great. And so let's see if we can deal with as many of these questions as we can. If we're going to answer as many as we can, I think it's going to be a case of answering them in just a couple of minutes each. But look, let's just start with the structure. I think that's a key one. Co-op, charity, different forms. I think Al, you were talking about the cohesion and making sure that you were going to bring people together. Can you just go into that a little bit more? And I'm keen to get other views as well. It's just whether is there a right approach? Is there different approaches that are best for different circumstances? I'll go to you first, Al, and then perhaps bring Alastair and then Paul
in. Thanks. Hi. It's a tricky one. We decided that co-op worked best for us. Not everyone would. There are other good forms of community organisations and trusts, but the simple fact of that a moorings or a housing co-op, turning that model onto the waterways works just as well. And for us, it kind of seemed to make sense. So I couldn't talk too much about the other forms. I think the Alastair and Paul have got a slightly different way of having done their things, but for us, definitely a co-op worked. And one of the things that also could be a major point to other groups is there are pots of funding for co-ops and for groups to form as co-ops, and there aren't necessarily, or it's not as easy to get funding for different types of groups sometimes. Maybe the others could say otherwise, but certainly that helped us, and that really helped us get off the ground. And just one quick last point, I noticed there's another Al Cree screen, which is two other co-op members who have joined, who obviously aren't me, but that's Hannah and Stephen, who are also co-founders of the co-op.
Excellent. It's good to see them joining on your account. Alistair, I'll come to you in terms of, obviously you've focused on the charity, and obviously you can trade as well. Were there very specific reasons why you went that route?
Well, why do we choose to be a SKIO, a charity, rather than a community interest company? Well, it was a dark and stormy night. You know, a choice has to be made. What we knew was that the SKIO form is established, and we knew that Scottish Canals would be willing to sign an agreement with it. And without that, there was nothing that we were going to be doing. So we could potentially have made other things work. I've been involved in a CLG before, which was a possible form, but they can be a nightmare to set up for a number of boring admin reasons. The SKIO seemed to be simpler on the admin, and it's also a relatively established form. There are a number of organisations around Scotland using the form. Could a different form have worked? Absolutely, definitely a different form could have worked. In terms of openness and involvement, right? I tend to be of the view that any organisation actually ends up looking like the task it's trying to do. No matter what you do, you end up with something of a circle of people who are closest to the work. With a SKIO, there's probably more formality to it than with a co-op. But actually, you're going to end up putting some sort of structure in place to keep that right in any case. So things tend to look like the task rather than the form. But I can't tell you that SKIO is absolutely the best way to do it or the worst way to do it. It's working for us at the moment.
Great, good. And Paul, any thoughts from your side? Obviously, you can bring a lot of the legal thinking into this. You're probably very familiar with all the different forms that you could have gone. You went down a pretty unconventional, right on the fringes route to start with, but you've kind of tidied up the loose ends over the course of the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you were to look at our profession, in case people know, I'm a barrister in my day job, and if you were to look at our jobs, you would kind of assume that I would have gone the most official way to start with, but actually it was the complete opposite. Yeah, I mean, now it was really, when we were dealing with the Crown Estate, we had to have some sort of official grouping there, because the Crown Estate couldn't just, give a lease to Paul and friends. Really, a charity was the most ideal for us, because effectively the Crown Estate were giving that lease in order to encourage the regeneration of the river, and wanted to know that we were going to keep these moorings, this lease we were given for the regeneration of the river. So charity demands that, our objects are to protect and restore the river roading, and therefore in using this lease we have to make sure that that's what the lease is being used for. So a charity was definitely the right way for us, given the objects we had to look after the river.
Great. Thanks for those brief answers. Just linked to that are there good resources and sources of information that organizations that are doing what you've done can draw on? And Al, you mentioned the fact that you're able to broadly copy some of the models that happen elsewhere, maybe community housing and so on. Is there a resource anywhere? Is it something IWA should be collating, or is it already out there?
I think IWA probably could help with that. There isn't, as far as I know, of a single place to go. There is no one-stop shop. It's something that we're actually interested in doing, is trying to help form a federation of moorings cooperatives, that we can have everyone together and sort of, a website or a landing place where people can talk about things. I think, as I said earlier, I know of, is it Richard Howlett? I could be wrong with that, but I think he's looking into doing a similar thing and helping guide groups through the process. And so going back to the funding thing, Cooperatives UK, if you wanted to form a cooperative, they do workshops on whether it's appropriate for you. They're now a bit more familiar via us and a couple of other groups coming up as well on giving out advice and also help with funding for that. So there are some places to go to now, Cooperatives UK being one of them.
Great. Well, we'll keep an eye out on that. And what I would say is, anyone else that's on the call tonight, and Paul, Alastair, if you've got good resources and you want to share them, then we'll point people that are with us tonight to that. But Paul, did you want to come in briefly on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to back up what Al said, I mean, that would be a great idea to have some sort of federation, so we can just share that knowledge, and a lot of the time share the experiences, so we don't have to go through the same difficulties over and over again and reinvent the wheel. And if the IWA wanted to play a part in that, that would be a really great thing. And also just to note as well that the IWA did actually help us through Paul Strudwick, who became one of our first trustees and really kind of believed in the project at an early stage. So I'd like to thank for that as well.
Great, thank you. And I see that Richard Howlett's on the call tonight. And Richard, if there's any information, any links or whatever you want to share in the chat, then please feel free to do that. So another common point that's been raised in a number of the questions that have come up tonight is, and perhaps let's not personalize this because we've heard EA, PLA, TRT, whatever discussed. If I could sort of ask, where are the challenges, and perhaps more, where and how have you been able to overcome challenges in working with other serious influencers, navigation authorities, local authorities, whatever? Alastair, you mentioned the swear box, so let's start with you. Where have you seen the successes, and how do you see those developing? Are there any lessons that you'd want to share with others?
One of them is really obvious, and that's to get absolutely dug in and stick at it. And there are a number of people involved in Community Moorings Scotland who have been boaters for a while and have involvement through, I mentioned the Lowland Canals Association, through that group and the connections they've got. They have managed to push things very hard, particularly with Scottish Canals. And that's been enormously beneficial. A lot of it actually just taking advantage of the opportunities that are there, and they're different everywhere you go. One little thing that kind of lurks in the background for us is the sort of land reform. Now we're talking about water, not land, but Scotland has, in its recent history, seen a lot of changes to land legislation, land ownership. We've never had to go and get to the stage of testing whether or not that is something we can invoke on the canals. We've never had to do that because Scottish Canals has talked to us and moved and put forward, actually at fairly high costs to them, a set of documents that we can actually sign. However, in terms of co-location and ventures alongside, there's quite a lot of precedent in Scotland. There are quite a lot of groups who have taken matters into their own hand, both rural and to an extent urban, where they've used this community asset transfer concept and similar bits of legislation around land reform that could prove quite important to us in the future.
Great, thank you. Paul, I'll bring you in terms of some of the positive lessons learned from dealing with the different authorities.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is try and avoid any situation where you're dealing with the PLA, the most intractable government organisation I've ever come across, and completely lacking any accountability or interest in making good the waterways. So, but it's a very delicate balance because, you know, I did say in my talk that actually sometimes you have to just get on and do things and show your work and show what you're doing is worthwhile. Some organisation that doesn't work, and it can end up with your project being completely stuffed by them, which is what happens on another project with the PLA I did. But in other times, I think that can be a good way of doing things. You know, I think if we'd have tried to go to our local council and say, can we do this, 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 and this, it would have sort of either got lost in the system, or they'd be a bit confused. When something's happening on the ground and you are really demonstrating that positivity and that you're doing something worthwhile, I think it becomes much easier to gain the permissions that you need. I think the phrase is ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and that's often what I would say for these things. And also, as I say, to make sure as well that you're really putting stuff out there. I've just put in the chat our Friends of the River Roading Facebook group, but I think that started off with me and about 20 friends when I first moved to the river. But everything we did, all of the things we built or we cleaned up, or the trees we planted, we put it on that group. And so when the Crown Estate contacted us to say, hello, what you're doing on our river, it wasn't in too much of an accusatory way. It was in like, we've seen you're doing good things, how can we support that, rather than we want to get rid of you.
Right, and Al, just come in on that from your experience.
Yes, we've all been skirting around the difficulties that we've all had with navigation authorities and the legal aspects of things. And as Paul says, I agree, sometimes you just have to kind of forge ahead a little bit and as long as your motives and intentions are good. Sometimes the only way of getting things done is a little bit in the grey areas of things, shall we say. But certainly it's very difficult to do stuff. It takes a long time, and you need a good group of people who are willing to put in the time and the effort. And hopefully, as you can see here today, it seems like some of us are kind of making progress, but it is hard. And you do have to put in the time, but I think it's worth it in the end.
Great. Well, I want to just spend the last minute or so just talk about some of the practical things. I think, Alastair, it was you that was mentioning you're going out with the moorings and going to have a ballot and so on. Why did you decide on the ballots, and how did you actually put together the practical things and saying, right, it's going to be this number of boats, it's going to be here, it's going to be pontoons, it's going to be a ballot? How do you start to get to that practical getting it off the ground?
On the just to deal with that, the sort of exactly what physical moorings we're talking about here. Initially, people are going to moor next to a bunch of weeds, which they're going to have a plank to get over. So it's going to be rough, and that's just the nature of the startup. Now, in terms of the admin, the ballot was simply the obvious option, given that we had quite a lot of members, quite a lot of interest, and no possible way of starting a waiting list, because who's at the top? You've absolutely no fair way of doing that. So a ballot is the way. We do have a desire and a requirement, in fact, to have a mix of boats and boat types on our moorings generally, and so we are attempting a rough form of categorization, and that does skew the ballot and make it a little bit complicated to arrange. But we have managed to pull together a procedure which we took to the members at an AGM. We felt that was actually sufficiently complex and important that we had to do it at AGM, which we did last winter, and that was supported. So we're going ahead with that format. Our current feeling just now is that thereafter a waiting list is perhaps going to be the more appropriate way to do it, because once you've done the ballot, you've got precedent for a waiting list. The details of that we have not worked out, so I won't be committal about those details. But yeah, the first thing is we couldn't think of another way to do it in terms of the first offering.
Great, thanks for that. And Alice, as you get things up and running, and how do you see the next practical stage?
One of the things is obviously the same as Alastair, I guess, is having things signed on the dotted line. So for us, we've got agreement with Thames Water, the landowner, by our bank for us, where our first moorings will be. And they agree they're going to give us the land. We've agreed most of the things and kind of got basic heads of terms understanding with them, but it's still just getting this piece of paper signed. And once we have that, then it's a lot easier for us to forge ahead. But going ahead in the future, I see us helping other cooperatives or mooring groups trying to set up and trying to help rejuvenate and reanimate the water space.
Great, thank you. And Paul, in the last 30 seconds, what's next in a practical sense? Is it another sauna, or how do you see the thing developing?
Well, we've got a basic infrastructure now, mooring set up, so it's really turning to our work on the river now, and I think it connects in with some of my work as a lawyer. So I also founded Lawyers for Nature, and one of the things we're trying to do is to get rights for rivers and to begin to treat our rivers once again as sacred and as legal persons. So effectively really doing whatever we can as a community of boaters to look after, protect and restore the river and to uphold its rights. Practical work out on the river. And of course the cruise, next year, which you're invited to.
Well, on that score, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope to see many more of these sort of initiatives really get off the ground and thrive in the way that we've heard tonight. Thank you all. We're already over time. We've only just begun to touch the questions, but we'll capture all these questions. We'll share them with our speakers if we can get answers to you, and we can start to collate a resource that really extends this wonderfully ambitious and activist sort of program up and down the country, then we will do whatever we can under the auspices of IWA to help. And I'm delighted that we've already been part of that. It's been wonderful to see so many people from up and down the country, from Scotland, from, well, across the other side of the North Sea, and there's Tromsø, Oslo. It's great to see folks from all across the Waterways community. So Paul, Al, Alastair, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for sharing your experience. Good luck to you in everything you're doing, and let me know if there's anything we can do to help from an IWA perspective. To everyone who's joined us tonight, thank you for giving up some part of your evening. Sorry we went a little bit over time, but I know that this has been incredibly educational and inspirational for every one of you. So thank you all, and good night.
Thank you very much.